Hello everyone, my name is Katie, also known as Insider PhD, and welcome to the No Name Academy. These are some short videos on the new OWASP API Security Top 10. If you're familiar with the Top 10 already, there aren't too many changes, but there are some interesting additions and mergers. These aren't designed to be watched in any order, so feel free to skip around based on what you're interested in, or maybe what's new and what has actually changed. So we're going to be discussing API6, Unrestricted Access to Sensitive Business Flows. And this is a new vulnerability that's just been added to the OWASP API Top 10, and it somewhat is friends with unsafe API consumption, both representing the downstream APIs and the upstream APIs. APIs are very rarely deployed alone. The idea of APIs is they can talk to each other and grant access to business flows. All of these APIs are interconnected systems where we might be having third parties, we might be having multiple APIs, we might be having different business units managing those APIs. And often when we think about the flow of data through an API as our mobile or computing device, we think of using the computer, accessing an API. That API connects to some back-end logic and a database, and that's the flow of data. However, when we actually think about how APIs are used more broadly, there's a lot more going on there. For example, our database may be connected to a data analytics platform. The back-end logic might be connected to a support ticketing system. Or the back-end logic might power an online store, which is then connected to a payment gateway. All of these can be third-party and completely external from the API that's actually being used and the organization that's using it. So this vulnerability is all about the API granting access to these business flows, a way in. For example, this could be something like using the API to plant a vulnerability that requires some interaction. So blind cross-site scripting, you can introduce that payload into the API, then contacting support to ask for help. With that planted XSS, it can be run through that support flow. So it essentially allows, even though your API has no really good security, great backend logic, and it's never rendered as JavaScript, that payload will then still run on some other system. Particularly this is true for APIs that may have some kind of element of paying. For example, maybe you're able to generate gift codes. An API may be able to do that, and then a user can abuse that API endpoint as a way to gain these advantages. APIs are not deployed alone. They're like a glue that helps stick together all these different systems. And it can be really difficult to predict where these systems all intertwine. And it may not even necessarily be clear that this is a security issue. It could be anything. Again, it really depends on the context in which those APIs are being run. So why is this an API issue? APIs will often send data downstream to other business functions. APIs may have limited validation downstream, so while the API might be secure, that downstream may not be. And it can be really difficult to find and investigate these attacks because it's not necessarily clear where they came from or what element of the full system was targeted. So these can be very broad attacks. So how can you resolve it? Do you have a way to identify, report, investigate, fix, and test vulnerabilities and ensuring that they are resolved in a timely manner? It's that application security program. Implement captures, which while it won't catch all misuse of an API, captures can be good for detecting automated misuse. And certainly with the rise of AI, this is not necessarily becoming the most true. However, implementing this kind of control can help. Consider looking at some tracking methods to check user behavior on the API and see what is happening. Don't not worry about downstream applications. Don't assume just because it's downstream that it's fine. Do think about that interconnectedness of APIs. particularly for valuable targets such as payment gateways. Checking a human is behind a request, checking that those valuable functions are secured downstream, really important. And if you're worried about these types of attacks, No Name can help. Its runtime protection can detect and block API attacks with real-time traffic analysis, while its active testing allows you to test for API vulnerabilities in the development lifecycle before they're deployed. Thank you very much. That was API6, Unrestricted Access to Sensitive Business Flows.